Hey, writers, it's the Writing Rabble where ordinary people can learn to publish your books. And we're going to talk about writing, publishing, and how to get started and how to keep going. It's bold, it's brave, and like the trusty llama, it's not beautiful, but it gets the job done. I'm Chris Everhart. I am the Rabble Rouser. I've got over 20 books in print. I've written novels, graphic novels, comic books, the occasional film script, and I've been doing it for over 20 years. The Writing Rabble is based on my book that I've just released as an ebook, The Writing Rabble. Write and publish your books your way. And the whole point is to let people know that you don't have to be extraordinary or an English literature major or a creative writing MFA to write books. And the good news is that it's better than ever to be a writer right now. So I'm happy to bring this to you and share my experience. And so I've got also the reason I've started this now. I actually wrote the book, The Writing Rabble, 2 years ago in one day during the COVID shutdown. And I held on to it for a while. And as I wrote in the author's note to the book, that I've just kind of come to the acceptance that things don't always happen on the schedule that I think they should. And so I just let it ride for a while, let it sit. And just recently, a friend asked me about writing. He wants to pick up his interest in writing fiction. His name is Wes Nelson, and he's going to join us right now. All right.
Hello,
Hey, Wes.
everyone. Hey,
Nice to see you.
good to see you.
Yeah, so we talked a week ago now, 2 weeks ago, about you wanted to get started writing, and I said, read this book first. So I ran home and got it set up and put um, onto Amazon Kindle so you could read it. And basically, I wrote this book for you, and I figured that having it as a just a starting point would be easier than me sitting down and having to, burn your ears with all of my experience to start off. But I think it might be a pretty good starting point. But first, tell the whole rabble now that you're in it about your reading, your interest in fiction, movies, whatever, what you want to write and why.
Yeah, so I started off reading, some of my earliest, fondest memories of reading are Michael Crichton, Jurassic Park, Sphere. I think I was reading those before I should have been, but I was very interested in that style. That movie, that Jurassic Park especially hit me at a cogent time. I think it was my age as Goonies. Some things just land at a certain point, and that was it for me. I love the characters, the world building, the fantastical, but also the realism of it. It was dinosaurs in our world. From there, I went on to, I've always kind of been interested in writing, but it always seemed so daunting, so overwhelming to me that I figured I'd have to maybe go about it a different way. Went to school, went to college, got interested in journalism through people like Hunter S. Thompson, and tried to emulate that style of writing, which is maybe more about being a personality, not to discount his writing prowess, but tried to maybe emulate more of his personality than more of his craft, and that got me into down some different paths in life. But I appreciated the style of journalism because it felt a little bit more palatable to me. It felt like something that I could do because it was shorter, it was less to write, and it seemed easier. It was more about being in the day-to-day world. Interned at a newspaper, got a couple things published through that. I wrote a story about a kid who won a 4-H award, and it wasn't really. I mean, I was getting like I got published a couple times, and that was awesome. Seeing my name in print, I still have those newspapers. I probably grabbed every single one I could off the stack, and they're still sitting in a box downstairs. But it wasn't really hitting the creative juices, and I didn't like the sort of prescriptive or the way it seemed like it was more of a formula. And graduated college and then decided I didn't want to go that route. Decided I need to pay the bills and start paying off that massive student debt I had accrued. So kind of got away from writing for a long time. Been reading throughout. I've gone had my ups and downs with reading. Recently, I've been on a huge fantasy jag. I've been reading. I read the whole Eye of the World, the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series. I've been reading some more grim, dark fantasy stuff like Joseph Abercrombie. Been reading. Been really liking the Nona the Ninth and that whole series from Tamsin Muir. That stuff has been awesome. Can't wait for that one to come out. Electo, I think, is coming out this year. So yeah, I've been reading a ton of fantasy, and now I decided within, I don't know, the last month that I want to write, and I feel like even at my age, I'm not that old, but I feel like time is slipping away from me, and I feel like it's time to get going, and I want to start, exercising that creative muscle. So I figured I'll buy a notepad, I'll start writing 15 minutes a night, and if I have to set a timer and just I'll put anything I can down on page for at least 15 minutes, and I'll just start there. And I did that, and it felt good. Mostly it was like word dumping, just minds, just thoughts. And, I was at certain points, I was reviewing the pencil I was writing with, and just talking about the quirks of this mechanical pencil. But it was good to just start writing and get it down and to actually start producing content or something. But then I decided it's time to take it up another notch, and I knew
Just
of Chris.
how long had it been since you had written anything?
Besides random birthday cards, I mean, I always try to add a little creative flair to my company emails, as much as I can get away with. But I don't think I've written anything major since probably since college. So, 2008 probably. So yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah, so fair to say it's been bubbling up for a while.
Yes, it's been bubbling. It's been sitting there. It's just a muscle that's gone unused, and it's begging to be used at this point.
Yeah. All right. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. You were about to say what's getting you restarted, or what made you decide to, I guess, talk to me.
Yeah. So I decided I wanted to get more serious, and the thing that I was running into was how to structure the story, how to apply a sort of formula. I'm vaguely aware of the thing like the three act structure, or the Joseph Conrad, the divining with the goddess. Like I know some of those words and phrases, but I have no idea how to apply them or what to do. So I have like an idea, and my idea seems to sort of run kind of concurrent with what I'm doing in that day. So my idea one day will be this thing about this guy dropping his kid off for school because that's what I did that day. But how do I start to write from a different perspective? How do I start to actually write a story? And honestly, my notebook was filling up, but it was mostly just kind of like almost like a blog that no one was going to see. And I really want to write a story. I want to write a novel. I want to put a novel on my shelf that has my name on the spine, and and that's my only goal for right now. If it went any farther than that, that'd be amazing. But right now, I just want to write some kind of novel, and I figured it was time to call on the experts. So that's when I reached out to you.
Well, it's a good place to start. If your goal is to get something in writing, that we can definitely start with that. That's It's a more healthy place to be than when I started writing and realized I could write. I was like kind of surprised that I could. I wanted to go to film school, but I couldn't afford it, didn't have the time, had a young family, and I was saving some ideas, though. I'd, clip out newspaper, clippings or copy stories here and there as inspiration file that I would use later, I imagine, for a screenplay or that I would write or the film that I would make. And after realizing that that wasn't going to happen in the time that I wanted it to, because I was having that creative push too. it started to get more and more uncomfortable because I studied art from junior high through college, and I hadn't been doing art, and I realized later it was because it had become too much like work after doing it that many years. So I actually just took one of those stories out of the file that I'd been saving and said, well, I've got a PC at home. I've got a library down the street. This was even before there was as much on the internet as there was. This was, you know, 1999, 2000. So now, you don't even need to go to a library necessarily. But I just took that and decided to write a book. And that manuscript, I did 13 drafts, and it's still in the drawer, the digital drawer. It hasn't seen the light of day.
Oh
And I
no.
wrote a little bit about that in the Writing Rabble. And the reason is because it's just not good. But it was the project that was my training wheels. That was doing it, redoing it, having people who I respected read it and tell me, well, this kind of works, this kind of doesn't. The main thing was, that I heard over and over and over again was get to the murder. So at the end, the manuscript ended up being the murder was in like the first chapter, but and it was experience. But I along the way I got offers to write for younger audiences, and that really captured my imagination and gave me something to work on. So we definitely help you get started. So when I told you about the book, The Writing Rabble, and sent it to you, what were you expecting?
I was expecting that it would be much longer, much more complicated, much trickier. I wasn't aware of how the self-publishing game could be or where it was at. And so it was very heartening to read that I could just do this. And that was one of the big obstacles I always felt was in my way, was that I needed to be some kind of celebrity to get noticed, to get a book deal, to then be able to supplement my income so I could quit my, it would just, there's so many steps that it seemed insurmountable. And that I was maybe better off becoming, TikTok famous so then I could get a book deal that way. So I would come in the back door sort of thing. So, but it from the get-go, it seemed like, oh, yeah, I mean, I could probably do this. It seemed a lot more accessible to me when I first started reading the book.
Yeah, when I started, the Kindle didn't exist. The thing that I did want to do was that was there was a local writer named Vince Flynn who's become, well, he's passed on now, but had hit it big with the military thrillers. And he had sold his first book out of the trunk of his car, gone around to bookstores and asked them to carry his book, and did signings. I know that he had an agent in New York who was having a hard time selling the book, and as I remember, his agent put an ad in the New York Times talking about the book, and that's what got the attention from a publisher. Um, and but at that time, that was the only option. There were what they call vanity presses, where they'd go, oh yeah, we'll pretend to edit your book, and we'll print 5,000 copies of it so you can use them as doorstops, and charge you a bunch of money. But the the idea of just putting out some books and earning a little bit of money at a time at it wasn't really a thing. I mean, it's super expensive. You had to print them, and that was expensive. And you were hoping for an advance on royalties that would help you pay the bills you'd accumulated writing the book, and give you a head start. But that was hard. There were a lot of gatekeepers. You had to get an agent. And in order to get an agent, you had to know somebody, which, I went to a lot of writers' conferences and met some people. I did have an agent, but he couldn't sell any of my young adult books. And those are Those are some that I've self-published. Now, I also, I got a lot of contract work, which was nice. So I was paid upfront to write books that I don't get royalties on. That was a good thing. Now I still know a lot of writers who do that, and surprise, surprise, the fees or the commissions have gone down, and of course they want more work. So it's that's not the best proposition right now either. But since the when the Kindle came out, which was I think around I want to say 2007, I'm not really sure about that. But there was a gold rush, so to speak, for writers who were prepared, who had work that they could put up as ebooks, and were willing to do it. And I know some of those writers. I know a couple people who did have done really well that way. And but since then the market has gotten more crowded, so there's more techniques or more things that you have to do to promote your books. But the thing is that you don't have to hit it big anymore. If you just want to write books and put them out there, and you're willing to push some buttons and even do your own marketing, which it's out, the marketing tasks, so to speak, are out there and ready. If you're willing to do that, then it really the name of the game is backlist, is just
Hmm.
writing and putting out as many books as you can. And so if you're a prolific writer, you can put them out as fast as you want, you
Hmm.
know. And I kind of talk about that a little bit in the Writing Rabble too. About one of the things that I mentioned was that when I was growing up, and maybe you too, it was like all you ever saw was the best finished product.
Hmm.
Even the crappiest TV show had was the best product they could put out.
Hmm.
And now that we've got so many channels, YouTube, TikTok, whatever, blogs, everything, it's okay to work your way through the process of getting better as you go. And fiction readers are very loyal. So if somebody likes your stuff, they will either go back and find everything that you've written, or they'll follow you and they'll read everything you write. So
Hmm.
that's one really nice feature of writing and publishing fiction. So you expected it to be complicated,
Yes.
but apparently I tried to just be real when by the way, I said earlier that I wrote the book in one day, and that's true. I woke up at 3:30 in the morning and thought, it's time to write the book that I've been meaning to write for writers. And I
Wow.
finished it about 10 o'clock, 10:30 that night, not including later little notes and additions and edits and stuff. But I think probably reads like a stream of consciousness.
Yeah, that was impressive. I when you wrote that in the book, I was like, how that doesn't seem possible. Because I was thinking at the time, like, doesn't he get like stuck? Doesn't he just like stop and go, should I be saying this? And then get stuck in that self-doubt and all the like non-market related problems and stuff like that you talked about in the book. And I don't know, I felt like I would have got stuck a bunch of times throughout that, but it sounds like you just went for it. Is that kind of how you normally write, or?
It's how I've learned to write, and I do it more often now than I used to. Yeah, I definitely, was one of those times where I just said "screw you" to the editor in my head and just went
Yeah.
for it. I think for that in particular, I had more confidence in the material, because I had the experience. I had some imposter syndrome, like, oh cripes, is anybody ever going to read this? I don't know. But I knew what was inside, so to speak, and I just shut off the editor and just went for it. Now I didn't go like zip straight through.
Okay.
Some of those sections I wrote before other sections the way they come up in the book. So they, the the arrangement was a little different. And the reason that I ended up with a llama as the as the what do you call it, spirit animal or whatever, was because I wrote one line about, I think it was in the part about, doing the self-publishing, that, I said that the fences are falling and this petting zoo llama is running for the hills, right? Just
Yeah.
trying to get my mind out of where I started, because I had to, which was you gotta do this, and this to, you gotta finish the book, get an agent, get it published and all that stuff. That it took me a while to break out of that attitude. That's one of my problems when it comes to things like this. It takes me a while to shed the rules and pick up and just go for it. So, but yeah, that was, I think I wrote, it was about 16, 17,000 words in one day.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm a fairly quick writer, but that was a long day.
Yeah.
So, what else jumped out at you about the book? What was either different than you expected, or brought an insight that you didn't think you had
So the part
before?
about phantom expectation syndrome and writer's block, I thought that was really interesting. How it it can be smashed. It doesn't have to be a thing that, because that seems like, if I'm trying to avoid being genuine or being vulnerable, I'm going to find as many ways to protect myself. And you kind of made it sound like writer's block might be one of those tools that I'm just not feeling it, so I can't write anymore or something like that. So I thought that was interesting how you framed that, and just made it seem like something that can be smashed through. That was interesting.
Yeah. Well, it can only be written through.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no other way to get to the other side of it. The other thing is, I realized that I just went through this this past year, where I'm working with a publisher who's going to do basically the self-publishing method, but do it for multiple authors. And I said, "Well, shit, sorry, boop." I said, I could probably write them books, two of the first three books in a couple of months, and then have the other one a month later or so, which is generally true. I didn't realize that I hadn't paid attention to and honored the structure of a thriller. And I had heard a writer in an interview say that if you have a writer's block, it's usually about your structure.
Mm,
And I was blocked for a long time last year. I was working on other stuff, but on this particular thing, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a professional screenwriter, and I told him that line about, yes, I heard that it's usually structural if blocked, and he said it's always structural. And then finally, I was able to get back to this project and look at it and say, "This, I'm missing something." I mean, I know I could write this story a lot faster than I have, and it turns out I was for a thriller. I heard a long time ago, that a thriller is a good guy, a bad guy, and a ticking clock.
mm,
And I didn't have a ticking clock.
interesting.
Yeah, that was the main thing. I was also missing a couple other things, like rivals and that kind of thing that the character needed to kind of work against. So since I did that, now I'm unblocked and working on it again. But I like to say, which I did say in the Writing Rabble, that I don't believe in writer's block, because if I name it, then I have to feed it and clean up after it and
Yep.
have somebody else babysit it while I go on vacation, and that's too much energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say that you've been blocked, or that you just didn't know what to do, or
Yeah.
were
I've been
hoping that it would
blocked.
go away, the urge to write?
Yeah, I've been blocked since 2008, just because I just I didn't know where to start, how to start. That I thought my ideas might be too played out, or I thought they're too like or there's a million reasons. And yeah, and for whatever reason, I just wasn't doing it. And now it's like, well, no time like the present. Let's get going. So I feel like this sort of feeling of impending mortality was like the catalyst, and it's like it's never going to be a better time. And sure enough, that's true because it sounds like there is no better time. So
Yeah. And
yeah.
it sounds like you've started listening to some of the podcasts that I recommended, and you're probably already hearing a lot about that already. I think that also that, we get into the attitude that there are right ways and wrong ways to do it. And
Hmm.
my wife she's retired now, but she was a career journalist. And I said, yeah, I want to start writing, but I'm really not sure, what the rules are. And she said, there are no rules.
Hmm.
So that helped me get started without having more self consciousness than I needed.
That's
That
funny
would have
because when I
blocked
was
me,
in
I guess.
journalism school, they told me I needed to learn the rules before I could break them, and all I
Yeah,
wanted to do was break the rules. And they were like,
right.
"No, you got to learn the rules first." And I just was balking at that the whole time because I was like, "I have awesome ideas, and I feel good about them." And they kept telling me I was doing it wrong. The commas were in the wrong places. The lead was too long or too short, or it was always something. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's very discouraging. But then again, that's a different style. So I mean, maybe that
right.
was a message that I was in the wrong building, maybe.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be. Well, I can tell you that I heard people say, or people told me when I talked about starting writing, well, there's a formula to it. And I was also resistant to that. Oh, not me. I'm going to write it different. And then now over the years, 20 years later, I'm like, you know what? There are, well, I won't say formulas, I'll say genre expectations
That's good.
that really readers are looking for when they come to a certain type of book. And if it's not there, they're not going to read it. They're not going to recommend it. They're not going to come back for it because it doesn't. It's as if you went into McDonald's for a quarter pounder with cheese and they gave you a Taco Bell taco instead.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah.
like, I'm not. That's not what I was in the mood for, and I'm not coming back here for a quarter pounder with
Yeah.
cheese.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and we definitely can get into some of that too. I mentioned in the book too that I got a big head about my writing because I was getting complimented by some fairly serious writers, and that came with that phantom expectation, that I thought I was supposed to be delivering something that maybe people weren't expecting after all. I couldn't make it as good. One of my favorite stories is about the singer Donny Osmond, who grew up in the entertainment industry on stage, with his brothers. And he was about 40, 45 years old, and he was doing Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat on Broadway, and he was getting stage fright worse and worse and worse. And he used to call his wife every night before the show. But one night he said to his wife, he said, I can't go out there. And she said, why? What's the problem? And he said, I can't be as amazing as everybody's expecting me to be. And
Hmm.
she said, well, just go out and do an average performance then. Because average for Donny Osmond is pretty good compared to what anybody else can do. And he
Yeah.
said his stage fright went away and he was able to go on and work and actually enjoy it. And that's like I take some inspiration from that. And so I don't have to be you don't have to be amazing, but you do have to get the work done,
Yeah.
right? You do have
Yeah.
to go from chapter 1 to the end. And if you don't get there, well, nobody's gonna, you're not gonna be able to sell books because you don't have books. You got a bunch of scenes stuck together, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I can resonate with that a lot. That makes a lot of sense to me because I feel like if I'm not going to be Stephen King, I'm not going to do it. And it's like, that's impossible. And I'm never going to do anything if that's my mindset. So I have to start somewhere. And I started reading his book on writing about that. And he just got going and he started writing and he copied a lot of things or emulated styles. And yeah, I haven't finished the book yet, but that seems to be the way. I've heard that from a couple people now where you just got to get going. So
Well, yeah, and also, we already have a Stephen King,
Yeah.
so we don't need another one.
Yeah.
Is that our individual voice is what is wanted and needed by the audience. They're looking for an authentic voice. So they're looking for an authentic voice, but there's a saying in Hollywood that I want the same but different.
Hmm.
you know, so that's where working within those genre expectations but doing things differently can be fun. I'm actually working on a project right now, a book that I just kind of started out of just basically from zero. I just sat down and started writing it. Cyberpunk, and you got the guy who's like a grizzled former soldier, and he's the hero, and he's being called up. He does some dirty stuff for his job, and but at some point when the person shows up who has to bring him the new opportunity that is going to get him into all this trouble, right? That the book is going to be about. It's usually like a smarmy lawyer or something like that, and instead I made it a little old lady,
Oh,
and
nice.
that what he realizes as he's talking to this little old lady is that she was a Marine just like him, and she's playing meek.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I thought, so you can do things like that that are on genre. You have to have that character bring the opportunity to the hero, but turn it on its head a little bit and find a different way of presenting that.
That's interesting. That's cool. Because, yeah, that'll be unexpected and yeah, that'll be more interesting.
So I taught. So and by the way, if you haven't seen the book, listeners of the Arrest of the Rabble, I've got the chapters go this journey thus far, where I talk about what I've been through, and how my path has come along. And I'm sure that as we go on, we'll be talking a lot more about that. At bad mistakes, which I talked about a little bit, and good mistakes was chapter 3. And it sounds like you were doing some of that, like copying, writing like your heroes wrote, and you know, diving in and getting some stuff published. And I also wrote in there, one of the headings of the section there was following the rules, so that you can learn how to do the the stuff that's expected, and then break them later. So, would you say that you've made some of those good mistakes
Yeah.
already?
I, yeah, I don't know. Sure. Yeah. I even just recently I started writing something about a person running through the desert. I was kind of emulating the gunslinger,
Yeah.
and I
Yep.
just love that just as a way of, and it was kind of this exercise of like, I just need to get started, and I'm just gonna just put this person, this character in the desert. I don't even know why they're there, but they're running and there's arrows hitting the sand next to them. So let's go. And 2 pages in so far, and I don't even know where it's going to go yet, but I'm interested in it, so I'm hoping a reader would be too. So
Yeah. Well, that's a good indication. Is that if you're into it and you're not too self-aware or self-serving, there's a good chance that somebody else is going to like it. And by the way, I think one of the books I recommend at the end of the Writing Rabble is Ray Bradbury's Zen and the Art of Writing, which I just love. Ray Bradbury, love his passion for writing and storytelling. And he said he did everything wrong at first. He copied the writers he loved, and was doing short stories, and I think it was, I can't remember if it was Fahrenheit 51, 451 or the Martian Chronicles, that finally when and I think that to some extent you have to get some of that out of your system to get to your authentic voice. But again, you only get there by writing. You can't
hmm
think your way through it,
hmm
or read your way through it. You have to get those words on the page, and keep it rolling. I talked quite a bit, or a good Chapter 5 was the story species and why storytelling is important to us. I mentioned, Stephen King's On Writing, where he said that I loved. He said that a book is a time travel, it's a time machine. That is so cool. That I'm sitting here writing now, and at
Hmm.
some point in the future, might be days, might be decades, someone is reading exactly what I'm thinking right now,
Yeah,
which is really amazing.
that's awesome.
Yeah, and the idea that the three act structure, by the way, goes back at least as far as Aristotle. That's 2300 BC. So I may want to break those conventions, but I don't think I'm the next Aristotle. So, but you know what? Though even Stephen King writes a lot of the same format story over and over again. Something happens when a group of people are kids, and then
Hmm.
they're dealing individually with the trauma, and then they come back together and deal with this. That's just one of his kind of standard plots. But then every now and then, out pops 11/22/63 or
Yep. Yep.
or yeah. It's just, so I guess you got to get there by writing through it.
Hmm.
So I really liked that idea of the story species, and also one of my favorite quotes, which is by a author and story consultant, Carl Iglesias, who says, "Stories teach us how to be human," and I just love that quote. And I mentioned that to my screenwriter friend. He goes, "Oh yeah, Carl's a great guy." I'm like, "Oh, you know Carl Iglesias? Okay." Um, so we talked. I talked a bit in there about the channels that we have that are available now to get our work out there, which is really really amazing. My writing heroes are those middle like early and mid 20th century writers who like Ray Bradbury who just hammered away till some said until their fingers bled and but they're just writing and that and there were and people will say well yeah but they had to get an agent and all that stuff. The truth is that there were a lot of fiction magazines and theme magazines
Mm.
back then where in fact I don't know if you're familiar with The Shadow, which is it was a radio show that made Orson Welles
Oh, yeah,
famous.
yeah.
There was a movie with Alec Baldwin in the
Yep.
90s, which is pretty decent. And that's what got me on the radio show was that I watched the movie with my stepson and I turned to him and I said, this used to be a radio show. And he goes, what? And I said, yeah, just before there was television, they had half-hour shows on radio. And before that, there was the Shadow magazine, which
Mm.
was stories about the Shadow and they've, pulp fiction, literally, fiction printed on pulp paper. And there were, mystery magazines and sci-fi magazines. So they were outlets for those writers to put stuff out there and keep it coming, and they were able to make a living at it. And the what I got into a little bit too was writer critique thyself is that you've got to get thick skin and you've got to be willing to edit and be edited,
Mm.
right? Because if
Yeah.
you if you're going to take your marbles and go home every time somebody says they don't like something about your writing, you're not going to survive.
Yeah.
You're not going to survive writing. And I even admit that there were some things that I was overly sensitive about, and I've had to learn to be more thoughtful and tough about, I guess.
Well, how did you do that? So you mentioned the book going to writers groups, and you said you learned how to kind of glean out the constructive criticism and the stuff that maybe wasn't as helpful. Like how did you figure out what was gonna you were gonna take and what we were gonna leave behind?
It just like everything else, it took a while to build the intuition. And I think I even mentioned this in the book that to stay away from writers group for at least the first couple of years. Luckily for me, I did that, and it was more by accident than by design. But by the time I got to the writers group, which we had a small writers group, we had rules. You had to be working on something. You couldn't defend your work at the table. It was either on the page or it wasn't. So it was put together that group by one of my writing mentors, and I there were some times when I didn't separate the good from the bad criticism, and it cost me. A couple stories I wrote that could have been published, but because I listened to the criticism, I thought, well, God, maybe they're right. This is crap, or it doesn't work or whatever. But there were other times too when, again, through practice, is you develop the intuition to say, yes, nah, no. I don't agree with that. And of course, if you're in a writers group for a while, you start to learn people's personalities.
Sure.
But I looking back, of course, I did some of the same things where I criticized the phrasing or the grammar or something like that. When really, honestly, it was probably just fine in somebody else's work, and to do it my own way. But you also mentioned to me that you have a tendency of just writing without editing.
Hmm.
Is that is that your common way of doing things?
Yeah, I like to write. So that was my idea was I would start writing in a notebook, long form with a pencil, and then I'd have to put it onto a computer at some point, and that was going to be like my way of forcing myself to edit it as I typed it into the
Ah,
computer. So it, I don't know. I don't. I have this idea, or this ego that the first go around is the best, and it needs to be this raw, pure stream of conscious type thing, which is maybe harkening back to a different style, or maybe more of a Hunter S. Thompson type role. But I know deep down that it needs to be edited. I know that there's going to be things that you know, but I have this idea that it needs to be this like pure, it's just gonna like manna from heaven, like the muse is gonna divine through me, and I have to be the vessel, and I can't let anything get in the way of that. And I know that that's not realistic, but I like the idea of it. So I'll kind of have to force some edits upon myself, I think.
yeah. Well, one of the things that I think I mentioned this the other day too when we were talking about it, is that that's not necessarily a bad thing. To be able to, just plow through a draft is, that's the harder thing, is to get that first draft done. Because we can edit a bad page, but we can't edit a blank page.
Yeah.
So getting it down is super important. And you might like reading the War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, which is I think a link that I put in the ebook. I think it's in there. I hope so. Because that he talks specifically about the muse, and I think that it's really it can be helpful. In fact, I just started kind of pointing myself in that direction, and it's already helping me, get my writing done instead of thinking that I do think, and this is part of the thing about the llama, is that the llama is a beast of burden. It carries things. And I
Hmm.
just read Stephen Pressfield's newest book called Government Cheese, where for a number of years he was a truck driver, and he related delivering that load to being a writer.
Hmm.
That there's something that I am carrying that I have to bring to the reader,
Hmm.
right? And that's my job. It's not necessarily to, and I know that I mentioned this in the book, is that, knowing what my job is to come up with stories and write them and finish the books and ship them.
Hmm.
It's the reader's job to decide if they're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I even said that, more and more the critics they don't matter. It's
Hmm.
not their job to decide whether the book is good or not. So the readers will are since we can get to the final user, the reader, almost instantaneously now. they're the judge. You know,
Hmm.
you don't need good reviews from anybody else.
Yeah, that's very freeing too, is that I don't have to sit here and second guess. I don't have to create all these critics in my head to critique my own work. I just need to get it down and get it out. And yeah, that's really inspirational. That's nice.
Yeah, it's a kind of being careful not to try to make everything perfect because that ruins a good thing, right?
Hmm.
And there was something else came to mind when you're saying that uh, I'm sure it'll come to me. But yeah, so what we're doing is we're delivering something, and that's our job. I can't do the reader's job for them.
Hmm. Hmm.
So and I talked a little bit about discipline, and you know that I've mentioned many times that I am not a disciplined person. It
Me
just
neither.
does not come naturally to me. So I part of what I'm hoping to get out of finally getting the Writing Rabble up as a podcast and as a community is that it'll drive me to get my work done because it's going to be pretty hard for me to show up and talk to you about your writing when I haven't done my writing.
Yeah. Yeah, same thing. I was all week. I was like, what do I need to do? I need to prepare. Well, I got to go through that resources. Yeah, that was because I won't. That's why I did the whole timer thing. Because if I don't set it on a timer for 15 minutes and I don't have this idea that I need to do it every single day, I just won't do it. So I'll,
Yeah.
I'll find something else, especially when I'm, into my like my chillax time of the day, where I'm done with work and that's that kind of getting to that work-life balance sort of thing is that's kind of the next frontier for me is how do I allocate my time? How do I feel, good about how much time I'm spending, what are my actual expectations for what I can get done and how long it's supposed to take me since it's not my job, like that. That's kind of what I was spinning on this week. So I'd be interested to hear how
Yeah.
you handle that or what you do with time management, I guess.
Well, luckily I have a job where I don't have, like, speaking of undisciplined, I don't have to be anywhere at any particular time. You know, I drive ride share and I do courier work and notary work. So sometimes I'm scheduled, but it's not like I have to be up at 6:30 to get showered and go to the office or whatever. And some mornings I wake up at 6 and I'll look at the map, you know, the Uber map, and see if it's busy. And if it is, I'll go out and drive, and then maybe I'll get when things calm down 9 a.m. 10 a.m. I'll sit down and get 30 to 60 minutes of writing done. Sometimes I'll get up and come straight to the office. That the uh, may not be the most productive way of doing it, but it's what I'm doing now.
Hmm.
And I have said for a while is that you got to go where the work gets done. So if things are loud at home and you can only get something done at the coffee shop or in your car in the parking ramp or something, then do it. But the funny thing is that you may have heard me mention this too, is that somebody mentioned to me a couple 3 4 years ago now that you pay the dues or you pay the price.
Hmm.
And when I don't get my writing in regularly, I get crabby
Mm.
and I'm grouchy and I don't know how it comes out on other people, but I'm walking around kicking the ground and God, what's my problem? How come I can't, and then I realize, oh, well, I skipped writing the last 2 or 3 days. And, that's work that really, needs to be done
Hmm.
for my emotional health as much as it's like when I've got these stories coming forward or want to come out of me, and if I'm not sitting down and doing the work, I'm blocking it up, and it's just ugh. It gets kind of. I think I ran into you a couple days ago and told you that I hadn't been writing a couple of days.
Yeah.
I was feeling kind of out of it. So part of it is, paying the price where,
Yeah.
finally, I'll sit down and I'll do the work. But I think also for me, not. trying not to make it such a big deal.
Mm.
That I think one of the things I mentioned the other day was realizing that life is not an outcome based proposition.
Mm-hmm.
It's an experience based proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, wonder if writing could be like that too, where yeah, the goal is to get books out there so people will read them,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a result that comes out of doing the work, out of the process, right?
Yeah.
So I I have to live the experience of writing
Yeah.
in order to get to that result.
Yeah.
It's that outcome. It's kind of strange, but when we look at it from the outside, we look at a writer who, they've got a bunch of books in, in print, and they're earning their living at it. And you're thinking, oh man, that looks like the way of life. That looks amazing, so much better than mine. As if,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just imagining that their life is better than mine because they're writing full time, but I'm starting to think that's not the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but and then also, I think that also helps me let go a little bit more and identify the muse I that there is a power that where these stories come from. And again, Stephen Pressfield talks a lot about this, that is really beyond me, because I don't, it's not like I sit around and I I'm not a cartographer. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
sitting down and writing, all these details and stuff. I'm setting the stage with the genre and the plot, which,
Mm-hmm.
the plot, honestly, story comes from somewhere else too, you
Sure.
know. And but I'm putting structure to the story, the inspiration, and I'm doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the idea that it comes it comes from somewhere else, it's weird, but it must be true,
Yeah.
because I didn't. A good way of thinking about that is that I'm not an ex-Marine doing assassinations 800 years from now.
Yeah.
So the fact that I haven't had that experience,
Yeah.
it's not an autobiography, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it must be coming from somewhere else. And I think, I wouldn't torture anyone with my autobiography, the Writing Rabble notwithstanding. I don't think it's an autobiography, but
No.
yeah. And so what other thoughts did you get, or
I
what other inspiration or surprises did you get from the Writing Rabble that
so
you
I
think would be
liked the
helpful?
part about how we kind of touched on it earlier about how true authenticity, like truly unique
Mm,
voices, are maybe too weird for people. And
yeah.
that was the kind of pressure I'd put on myself, was that I need to be like Frank Zappa or something. I just to be, I need to take a pencil and write with my own blood or something. Like, it's got to be far out. It's got to be crazy. I got to be doing acid all the time, or it's just got to be this crazy thing. And then I'm thinking, I'm like, I don't want to listen to that. I don't want to read that. Like, I like to read things like, even like Jack Reacher, where it's just like he's just going out and busting people's heads and solving crimes. And so writing something like that seems way more palatable than some crazy kooky thing that's in a language I just made up on the spot or something, you know?
Yeah, well, you're familiar with Hunter S. Thompson's life, aren't you? I
Hmm.
mean, it's not all that enviable.
No, no, not at all.
Yeah, so it's, people who live like that, they pay a price that I can't afford to pay.
Right.
I need to live on this block where I live, and and go to the places I go. I couldn't live Hunter S. Thompson's life. But and that was something that I think that might have been what I missed before, was the idea of authenticity and voice. Again, the world already has a Stephen King. We already have a Lee Child. We already have a Clive Cussler, and we don't need another one. But there is a real appetite for the type of stories that they write, and we can bring our own voice to that, and that's what's interesting to people. But
Hmm.
again, it takes time to develop your authentic voice. And some people, I guess some people hit it right away, and then there's others of us who have to mine and get through the basically. I feel like I'm mining through a garbage dump before I can even hit the authentic dirt below to start
Hmm.
digging for something that's good. But it's good practice, and there is a lot to learn from our heroes. But again, I don't think that anybody wants to read my imitation of a Stephen King book. You know, so that sounds tedious.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you develop as you're working toward your authentic voice, you're also developing faith that you're that you can write the story, right? So that you're not constantly double, trip, second, third guessing everything you put down, and you develop some faith in yourself, some faith in your choices, and in a lot of ways, it's like sometimes the kookier the better. You're like, oh, does that sound right? I don't. That's kind of weird. And I don't know if you've ever. It sounds like you haven't written a lot of fiction. Is that true?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I can guarantee you that as we go on and you start writing fiction, you're going to experience the phenomenon of characters presenting themselves.
Mm.
And I have that frequently where a character will just show up in the story,
Hmm.
have something to say and something they want to do.
Wow.
And a lot of times, they become an important part of the story.
Hmm.
But I, until I wrote and I found this multiple times where it was like, wow, until I wrote the line, let's say David walked in the door, I had
Yeah.
no idea that there was a David.
Wow.
Another example is I'm going to be we're going to wrap up here pretty soon, but I'm going to be submitting first three in a series of middle grader books about a kid who lives in the city, but he gets moved out to the country where there's no internet or anything, and strange things happen out there. But he meets these two girls, these sisters, who live in in a big old mansion nearby, and the girls don't talk.
Hmm.
And I didn't know that was going to happen until the girls showed up.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's kind of creepy, but it's fun. And I mean, talking about the muse and that kind of thing, is that knowing to not block that. And anytime I have blocked it, if there was a turn or a character or whatever that I didn't expect, anytime I block it, it stops my progress in the story.
Oh, wow.
It makes it harder to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like trying to stop a river.
Yeah. Yeah. Clearly, your mind wants something to happen, and so it's almost like, yeah, that's crazy. That's really cool.
Yeah. And if you're forcing something to happen or not happen that just isn't there, you're ultimately cheating the reader of the experience too.
Yeah.
Because I've always said that I don't know that my books are. I'm not saying my books are good or whatever, but I've always said that writing a book is like reading a good book for the first time.
Mm.
It's like I just don't know what's going to happen,
Hmm.
every sentence. So that's part of the magic and the fun, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you have any other questions or thoughts before we wrap up, Wes?
I want to get started. I'm ready to go. And also,
Okay.
can we put a graphic up on the screen that shows all the famous people I've compared myself to, just as like
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
a tally?
exactly. Well, yeah,
Okay,
we'll
cool.
start with Hunter S. Thompson. We should put their
Yeah.
gravestones up, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I wanted to be Jim Morrison and Hunter S. Thompson and
Yeah.
what's his name? Hunt for Red October, Tom Clancy,
Oh yeah.
and all that stuff.
Love
So,
that stuff.
oh, and of course, um, Jack Kerouac. You
Yes.
know,
Yeah. Write the whole
but
book in one go on one continuous sheet. I love that idea.
yeah, we should. We probably should get a tally though going. Yeah, put a graph up or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions or thoughts?
Let's tease what's next. What are we doing next? What's the
Well, I
next
think
step?
what we'll do is since we want to put some backbone into what you're doing, um, we'll get into some of the techniques I've started to develop. I think the next thing we're going to talk about is the who, what, when, why, where.
Cool.
And we might actually, before that, we might start with genre too.
Okay.
So let's do that. We'll talk about genre, and then if that's less than expected, I think that's going to be fairly easy. The genre thing. Then we can talk about who, what, when, why, and where. That's just one of the lessons that I've been thinking about for at least 2 years of putting together, and basically you're just answering questions, right? And developing the world and the story as you go along. And but these are things you need to know,
Yeah.
uh, because like I told you before, this that I call it running out of road. I started several books where I didn't know what I was doing, so
Hmm.
I got to a point where I'm like, well, I don't know what happens next, so I just kind of walked away from the book.
Yeah.
And until I learned to outline, that was the first time that I actually finished a manuscript.
Oh,
So
that's
we'll
what I'm.
we'll
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get going in that direction. And we also have to kind of see what works for you, because if sitting down and doing automatic writing is more natural for you than plotting something out, then we'll figure that out as we go, and we'll accommodate what we're doing to that, so that by the time we're done, in the not too distant future, you'll actually have a book that you can publish. So
Sweet.
that's the goal. Now, do you know
Yeah.
what genre you want to work in next?
Yeah. I think fantasy, but like present day fantasy.
Like urban fantasy, we call it now.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That sounds good.
Yeah. So what I'm going to suggest you do is look into urban fantasy.
Okay.
Um, Look into. I mean, you can basically Google urban fantasy genre,
Okay.
or urban fantasy elements or components, that kind of thing, and kind of pull together your own list out of all those resources of what your genre is,
Okay.
because that you need to know that, because so that you know what world you're playing in and what expectations they're going to be. And then we might be able to just go through who, what, when, why, where then, or I might have to send you away for a week to work that stuff out.
Okay. Cool.
So genre, urban fantasy genre elements and expectations for next week.
Got it.
All right.
Sweet.
Okay, so let's sign off the writing rabble here. So thanks everybody for joining us. This has been an hour of nonstop fun and engagement in the writing world. We're just getting started. If I didn't mention it earlier, the reason that I'm starting to do this now, when I've been wanting to do it for a while, is because Wes asked me for help, and I thought, well, I've been thinking it's about time, and we just decided to jump on and do it. So there might be a lot of stuff going on around here that doesn't look completely finished or fully developed, but we'll be working on that as time goes on. And what I want you guys to know is that if you want to write and you're willing to do the work, then the Writing Rabble can help you write and publish your books your way. So till next time, butt in chair, words on page. Thanks, Writing Rabble. See you soon. Next week, actually. Bye.